Okay. Welcome, super secret agent trainees, to WhizGirls Academy. Today, your mission is to learn from Danielle Strachman. She is the founder and general partner of 1517. Thank you so much, Danielle, for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me here. It's exciting.
Awesome. So tell us about your childhood.
Gosh, let's see. My childhood. I grew up on the East Coast, outside of the Boston area, and um, let's see. Starting really early, I was very premature as a kid. I was almost 2 months premature. So shout out to the preemies out there. Um, and uh, and gosh, where to go from there on the childhood? I was always very interested in music, actually. I became a like semi-professional clarinetist, by the time I finished school. And actually this weekend I'm going to a music camp. So music is still a very important aspect of my life, even though I'm not doing it in any professional capacity whatsoever. Um, but it was actually a lot of, it's interesting, like some of my childhood music training had a pretty profound effect on how I thought about education and teaching, because I had good teachers and I had some not so good teachers, and was also able to see what it was like to learn from teachers who were really passionate about what they were doing, and not just the instrument, but passionate about teaching, and teachers who uh, were teaching because it was a way to pay the bills instead of something that they really enjoyed. And so I felt like those teachers kind of gave me some insights into the education world early. Um, I have a younger sister, so I'm the older sister, and so we have that, like, I definitely have a lot of that, like, firstborn sort of dynamic, like pretty responsible, paving the way for your siblings that come after. Um, and I grew up. I'm actually like pretty happy about this at this point. I was about 15. Maybe I was a little younger than that. Maybe I was about 13 when we got uh, internet in the house. And so like my childhood, like the early years, were spent outside and running around, and I lived on a cul-de-sac, and that's just kind of what you did. Like there's a lot of like free spontaneous play, and I know a lot of young people don't get so much of that anymore. But then yeah, when I was around 13, we got our first like set of dial-up internet, and I remember being introduced to things like bulletin board systems, also sometimes it's called BBSs, and like running things like that as a 14 or 15-year-old. I didn't like set one up properly, but a friend of mine set one up and said like, "Oh, hey, do you want to like, be like a co-administrator with me on this?" And it meant that you could, this is kind of funny. I haven't thought about this in a long time, but being an administrator on a BBS meant that you could sort of spy on people. You could like, we didn't like have the same privacy that we have on the internet now. So I could literally see what people were talking about in chat rooms, and they didn't know I was there. And I've always really enjoyed collecting sort of like what I consider secret information. And that might lead into my work world a little bit, where it's like I'm trying to pick up on like, like little bits and tidbits of information in different places. And I just remember really relishing in these being able to have this like system admin level look at like, all right, what are people talking about in this chat room we have set up, or like watching this person play this game over here. And I really especially loved the secrecy part of like, oh, they don't know I'm watching them.
Yeah, that's
So
what that goes along with our WhizGirls mission of secret spy adventures and all the things, which is perfect. But it's funny because I haven't heard of BBS since my brother was on it back in the day. So
right.
that's
Yeah.
full circle. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like super old school stuff. And it was interesting to grow up when the internet was new, because like I always say, like, I miss the days of the internet being weirder and stranger, because it was small groups of people. I would go on classical music AOL chat rooms, and like I loved geeking out with people. In fact, one of my oldest friends, he'll still text me here and there. We've both known each other since we were 15, and we met in a classical internet chat room, and we both play clarinet and things like that. And he just sent me a message the other day, and it's kind of funny to see how the internet went from being like sort of the stranger danger place to like everybody meets off Twitter now. Like, it's just sort of what you do. So I was kind of early to that. But I do miss the days of the internet being weirder and stranger and not driven by like search engine optimization. I remember reading things and finding things on the internet that were just really interesting because it wasn't about ad content and things like that then. It was I don't know. I wouldn't even know how to say what it was about, but I can say that it was pretty profoundly different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know you mentioned music a lot, but any
Yeah.
other passions and hobbies as a child that have helped you now? And then if you had a dream job back then, tell us about that.
Another passion was animals hugely, but I don't think my passion for animals helps me in my job. I mean, it might make me like, I don't know, friendly with people where, sometimes I think people will be a little nervous at first to talk to me because they just don't know that I'm just a person like anybody else. And I'll pick up one of my cats and be like, look, it's a kitty. And people are like, oh, okay, I can just talk to you now. Like, it's no big deal. So maybe that helps. But yeah, when I was a child, I thought, and also when I was a child, I was the type of student, I was not a good student. And I had to, it's interesting. Both my brother and sister are the types who will ace tests, but they don't do the homework, they don't study, but they can get the A. I'm the opposite. I would study my ass off and then get like a C. Like I've never been a good test taker. School did not come easily for me. I learned to read late. And when you learn to read late in a lot of schools, they kind of track you for everything late. They don't say, oh, like this needs help and this, and like math is fine. They just say, oh, okay, like sort of push her to the back because that's what it means when you read late. And one thing that actually did help with though is like I have very strong grit and perseverance. I work very, very hard. And because, yeah, when things don't come easily, you just learn how to put in the hours on something. And I know we're recorded, but just don't tell my brother and sister, like, I don't think they work as hard as I do. And at the end of the day, I'm pretty happy with how life turned out. So that has been something that has been very important. But yeah, originally, I thought I might do something with animals. I was like, yeah, maybe I'll be a vet or something like that. But there was this other thing that I was always doing when I was younger, which was, even though I was not a good student, I was the type of kid who would stay in from recess to help other children with their homework and stuff. Like I loved being in a role, especially a helper role. And where that comes in, sort of now sometimes is like wanting to support people in what they do. And so that instinct to do that has always been there. And then lastly, I would say, at more like the high school level, I took very naturally to leading groups of people. And it's not like I didn't like to be out in front. It's like when I played music, my dad to this day will complain that like I would sit in my chair and I'd have the music stand up at my face so you couldn't like I couldn't see you, you couldn't see me. Like I had no desire to sort of like be exposed or like in an upfront position. But that said, I really enjoyed leading clubs in school, being a section leader in music, things like that. And I think a lot of that was like enjoying like being of service to sort of like some sort of cause or mission. And I don't know entirely where that came from. It just seemed to come really naturally that I would want to step up into those types of opportunities. It's like if someone said, oh, hey, is someone here, available to do X, Y, or Z? I'd be like, oh, sure, I'll do it. And actually, lastly, I'll say I noted this a little bit when I was in college. I had a friend who did some political campaigning, and he wanted to get on the ballot in Massachusetts. And I was part of this philosophy club that this friend was also part of, and it was like an all ages philosophy club. And so a bunch of us were in our 20s and some people were in their 30s, and my friend was in his 30s running for office. And He's like, hey, like, who will go door to door and knock and like get signatures? Because I need 10,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And I remember like people in the group didn't want to do it. And I also felt like, well, what are we here for if we're not like actually trying to make something happen? And so I helped him. And I was painfully shy growing up. Like if you had told my 10-year-old self you'd be knocking door to door doing anything, like she just would have had a panic attack. But it was again this like being of service of like, hey, like we got to help Dave like get on the ballot. So all right, I'm gonna suck it up and I'm gonna knock on a bunch of doors. And people called me a devil worshiper. It was amazing. Like all kind. They didn't like the platform he was running on. So it was an interesting time.
Yeah, that sounds wild. That sounds like an interesting experience back when you were a child.
Yeah.
Like you said, you were how old? Like
that was more like when I was a teenager, like I was 18 or 19, something like that. So that was that was a little bit later. I don't think I would have been able to do that as like a 10-year-old, but and also I might not have been able to validate signatures under 18, but
good point.
But yeah.
Yeah, but that's, I think, like, I always go back to the Steve Jobs commencement speech when he says, connecting the dots in hindsight. It sounds like you were building the blocks of everything you needed for what you do now.
It's quite crazy to see how that happens. And I'm still friends with my friend who campaigned. And every time I see him, I'm like, I just have to thank you for that experience. Cause like, it really helped me to like learn that I could, like my self-concept changed from doing something that I didn't think I could do. And I didn't have a lot of opportunities that were like that because usually people shy away from stuff that they're nervous or afraid of. And like he really, just like offered something awesome. And only in hindsight can I see like, wow, this made a profound impact, even though at the time I just thought I was helping my friend out.
Yeah, that's fascinating because going back to the whole Steve Jobs thing, I think it's interesting when you look back in hindsight. Okay, so tell us when you heard about the word STEM, and did you have any mentors along the way?
So STEM, I think when I was in college, the term STEM was sort of like, more of a thing. And for me, STEM was more about, I saw it less as where would I go in those domains, but like how would I work with students to like introduce some of these concepts. I used to be a tutor, and so I would go to people's homes and work with their children. Sometimes it was homework help, sometimes it was homeschooling families, and I would sort of bring different types of curriculum and trying to like open up people's eyes to different arenas and different things. And also try to use people's personal interests to sort of like bridge a gap between, I remember I had a lot of female tutoring clients who, didn't think they were good at math. And it was like they were great at math, but sometimes somewhere along the way, like a concept, didn't get introduced properly or taught properly or just didn't sink in or any number of things. And it's like, okay, let's go back. Like, let's look at this again and see what we can do to teach this in a way that it's scaffolded correctly and properly and so on. And so it was interesting to see some of my students go from, like boxing themselves into like, I can and can't do some of these STEM areas to like, oh, like I can do this, like it, it just wasn't introduced properly the first time kind of thing. And that was always exciting to see that change take place.
Yeah, that's a really good point because there's been a theme, and also I don't know if this was around the same time, but Barbie also said math was hard, so that was like,
oh gosh, it's so terrible.
Yeah, it was. If I was at Mattel, I probably would have had a fit if I heard that.
Of course.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't there, unfortunately, at the time. So, yeah.
Gosh, wow.
Yeah.
I wish you were there at the time. So
like some ruckus for sure. Yeah, I know. So, so this is literally why we're doing this, because we want our secret agents to learn from people that have been, successful in STEM careers. And obviously you are a big one in the finance space. So tell us next, what happened next? Like, were you in college when you were doing the teaching? Like, walk us through all of that.
So when I was in college, I thought I was going to go in the direction of neuroscience. And I thought that that's what, like, the career path I was on. I had applied to grad school. I got into grad school. And then I kind of had an early quarter life crisis where I said, gosh, like, first off, I said to myself, I'm going to go to school probably for like 7 more years. And I'm not going to have had a real job till I was 30. Like, that's crazy. And both my parents are small business owners. And so it just sort of made sense to me that one would, there was a possibility of like making your own money by starting a business. And I love neuropsych. And in fact, when I started my first company, which was a tutoring company, I used a lot of my learnings in this neuropsych department that I worked in, and actually used some of the assessments we had there to first work with students and then figure out like, okay, got it. Like, their visual memory recall is super, super good. So I'm going to use that to my advantage in how I teach them. And so that goes back into like the introducing things in the right way. And, just going back to like, let's teach people in an individual way that's going to work. So STEM became something where it was like very integrated into what I was doing, but I was like doing it in my own way, which was kind of interesting. And then even to this day, I noticed that some of that neuropsych background like still comes in handy in terms of just like observing founders and what they do. And it's quite funny because I still remember how to give a lot of these tests. We did intelligence testing and stuff like that. And like, I had like favorite tests that I loved to geek out on. And I was sitting in a kava bar with a friend recently, and somehow one of these tests like came up in our conversation, and we're talking about the test, and it's a visual test, and I was like drawing out what it looked like. And this guy who was behind us heard us talking about it, and he came over and he's like, "Oh, are you talking about the Ray Osterrieth? Like, that test is so cool." He's like, "I was just reading a magazine article about it." And I was like, huh. One of the things about neuropsych tests is that when they get into like the popular vernacular, it's kind of like it's not as useful anymore, because if you know too much about the test, then you can sort of like consciously or unconsciously game the system. So it's interesting to see stuff like that happen. But yeah, I went to school, thought I was going to do neuropsych, kind of had this early quarter life crisis and decided what I really wanted to do was start a tutoring company. I really enjoyed educating people, and going back to that childhood stuff, I remembered like the thing I wanted to do during recess was like hang out with students and help them on what they were doing. And I remember thinking that I really like enjoyed the neuropsych stuff that I was doing, but I wasn't super passionate about it. I wasn't like reading neurology books in my spare time. Um, and so I decided to start my tutoring company, and I built a website. I had to learn HTML. That's been one thing that's been interesting about my career is like, I've always been someone who loves applied almost anything. It's like reading about the theory behind something is like, it's okay, it's all right. But I really like the like, hey, let's like do something with this. And I remember when I wanted to start my business, I thought, hey, like I should build a website so that when, parents reach out, they can read about me and know stuff. And this was back in 2003 before people thought about like personal branding or websites. So I taught myself HTML. There's a publishing group called, I don't even know if they still exist. It was called Peach Pit. And I just used this Peach Pit book and like went line by line. And what I do find interesting is that I had friends, mostly guys, who were software engineers. And what I wish my brain had done at that time a little bit was be like, hey, cool, you built this website. That's awesome. What else can you build with these tools? Like I kind of stopped at like, okay, cool, I have my website. I'm like good to go now. Like my contact form works. This is awesome. But part of me is very curious of like, if I had like gone deeper down that side of a rabbit hole, what would have happened?
That's a really good point, actually.
Yeah.
You think
Yeah.
that's
I didn't know any female software engineers, not a single one. And so it was interesting to me to see like, oh, I like dabbled in that area, but it was my guy friends who were like continuing to go with it. And I wish I had like continued to go with it some more.
Yeah. That brings up a really good point, because when I watched the movie Hidden Figures when it first came out, I
Sure.
was literally screaming in the movie theater. Thank God I was at a screening, but I was like, oh my God, that's when I first learned how to code Fortran. I totally
Yeah.
had forgotten about that. And that
Totally.
was in the third grade here in LA, in Westwood, in a LAUSD public school, with a female computer science teacher. I had that every day, and was literally, we did Fortran, we did Carmen Sandiego on an Apple IIc green screen. And I
Yeah.
always think, like, what if I stuck to that forever? Like,
Right.
where would I've been now? Like,
Yeah.
that's, yeah, very
I know.
interesting.
It's like a fascinating question. Yeah. It's like and I know myself well enough to know, like, I probably would have needed like some sort of thought of like, oh, you know what? I really want to build this thing. Like, it's that sort of like a plot application layer on it. And I'm just very curious. Like, had I said, oh, hey, there's this other thing that I want to build, like that would have been the thing that probably kept me going. Um, so I wish I had had sort of more exposure to like, oh, that's cool. Like, you did this, like now that you've done that, you can actually do these other things. But I didn't really have any like mentors or guidance or anyone to kind of give me those directions.
You were just following your yellow brick road. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
basically.
Yeah. So the founder was for the Innovators Academy, right? That was the
So yeah, that's Innovations Academy. So after I was a tutor for a few years, it was funny. I had a homeschooling family I worked with, and this mom, Nancy, she was like, you should really open a school. I was like, oh, why would I want to do that? And that was a couple years before the school had even been really dreamt up at all. And I ended up working in a homeschooling co-op with this other woman, Christine Kuglin, and she came to me one day um, after we'd been working together for, I don't know, maybe like a year and a half. She said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a school. Would you want to start it with me? And at first I said, I was like, you're crazy. Like, we don't like school. Like, we love that we have this little homeschooling co-op here. And what she was noticing running that co-op was she would have families who would come and say like, oh gosh, I'd really love to partake in this. But like, we're not able to for various reasons, or like single moms would come and want to participate, but we weren't a full-time program. It was, just a couple times a week kind of thing. So we had this sense, and we didn't use startup vernacular, but it was this idea of scaling what we were doing, of like, hey, can we take what's working in this co-op and can we put it into a school environment? So we took 2 years to found the school and get it off the ground. And then I was co-principal with her for the first 2 years. And then I've been on the board ever since, and the school's been going for about 15 years. So
wow,
it's Innovations Academy in San Diego.
that's
When we first opened our doors, we were like 120-ish students, and now we're about 400. And we're really at this point starting to think about what are the next steps now that we have some like longevity under our belt. But a lot of the school is about project-based learning and having like different experiences and sharing different occupations with children, so they don't just get siloed into like, oh, what are you going to be when you grow up? And it's like, doctor, lawyer, teacher, like, um, and also giving them a lot of agency in terms of projects and what they do. So yeah, we have a lot of fun with that.
yeah. No, it sounds right up my alley with everything with WhizGirls Academy. It's very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
That's
Mm-hmm.
okay. So then, what happened next? Is it then you found Peter Thiel? Like, tell us about.
So I moved up to the Bay Area, and I was going to do a staycation, meaning like you kind of hang out at home and figure out what's next in your life. And I specifically told myself, like, okay, I'm not going to work for a while. Like, I was going to give myself 6 months. And it's not because I had like excess cash on hand where I could be like, sure, I'll take a vacation. I started burning through my savings, and I've worked uh, almost full time since I was a teenager, and thought like, okay, I've never done this like give yourself a break thing, so I'm going to do that. And 3 months into my staycation, I got a call from a friend who worked at the Teal Foundation, this woman, Lindy Fishburne. And her exact words to me were, the foundation has lost their minds. You have to get over here. And I was like, what? Like, I had seen Peter discussing the Teal Fellowship a couple days before on an interview, and it just sounded like everything was laid out. Like, oh, this is the applications online. We have mentors. We have this. Little did I know that like they hadn't even really built out a staff at that point for it. It was just kind of this like spur of the moment, here we go. And so I interviewed a couple days later, and then I came on board with the Teal Foundation like the next week after that to start building out the program from scratch. And I was really excited that it was a tabula rasa because, I wanted to embed like homeschooling philosophy and young people having agency and all these things into the program, and not just like, oh, here's what we're doing and you're just like managing this for us.
Right.
So it was really, really fun to get started. And it was, I think, really like fun for us, but also novel to give young people resources to do something in their future. A lot of young people are used to winning a prize for something they've already done, but it's very few and far between that someone will come to a young person and say, hey, I'm going to give you money. I'm going to give you time. I'm going to give you mentorship, to try to do something that I think you could do. Like basically, like very few people do that. And at the time of the Teal Fellowship 13 years ago, this idea of, hey, we're going to give you $100,000 as, an under 19-year-old, and we're going to give you the support of this program. And there's a condition of, we want you to be full-time on this. You can't be in school. You can't be enrolled like in university, and you can't have like a full-time job somewhere else. Sorry, cough coming on. And we want you to be putting like, your attention in this arena. And it really laid the foundation for a lot of the people that we worked with to create some very big household names, like people like Laura Deming with the Longevity Fund. She just launched a new fund, and she was one of our inaugural Teal Fellows. Dylan Field was in the second batch of Teal Fellows, the founder of Figma. People like Ritesh with Oyo Rooms out of India. So we got to work with people when they were very nascent on what they were doing. And, I knew that Ethereum was a big deal when my mom brought it up over Thanksgiving dinner, like a bunch of years ago. And I was like, okay, if my mom, like, I don't talk about the stuff with my mom. I was like, if my mom knows what Ethereum is, like,
then there's something going on.
There's something going on. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what's going on, but there's something going on.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's fascinating that you got to build like the blueprint for the next generation, like you mentioned, Laura, and like all of these things. And you did that for the Innovations Academy as well. So it sounds like you've been doing that for a while.
Yep.
And like, tell us how long you were doing the program director at the fellowship.
Yeah, I was there for the first 5 years of the program. And 8 years ago, we decided to start 1517.
All right. So tell us how that happened. And
yeah. So with 1517, we were watching our Teal Fellows start building. We use the word projects a lot because it's like, we have no idea where this is going to go. Like maybe it becomes a startup, maybe it's a nonprofit, maybe it's research, who knows? So we were seeing lots of people's projects starting to take shape. And what we were also noticing is that it was very hard to engage the investment community with the young people we were working with. And I would often come with this like educator's mindset to investors and say, hey, would you do a feedback meeting? Would you give them feedback on their deck? Like, kind of like, will you help to educate about how this world works? And the response I got was mostly, we don't do that. And I was like, I don't get it. Like, what do you mean you don't do that? And so 5 years in, we were watching things like Figma start to take off. I think Figma was starting to raise their Series B. And we just thought, if these investors are not going to take our young people seriously, like, we think there's enough of a track record here to say there should be a 2.0 version of the fellowship, and it should be a venture fund. And so we started brainstorming on the idea some, and we took the idea to Peter Thiel, our old boss, and we had a one pager. And the one pager had, like 8 outperforming companies from the fellowship that we had worked with. And we were pitching him over breakfast. And what we were pitching was not like, please give us money to do this, but please don't be mad at us for leaving our operational roles. Like, we felt so blessed to be able to work with the organization and work with the people we worked with, that we didn't want it to be like insulting or something that we were leaving, because we had made that decision. But we were in that meeting. It was myself and Michael and Peter. And Peter asked at one point, he says, well, how much are you guys raising? I said, well, we're thinking about raising something like 10, meaning like 10 million bucks. And Peter starts kind of looking at the floor a little bit, and he looks up and he goes, well, you should raise 15 and I'll be 4 of it. And like, I smiled so big, I covered my mouth. Like, I couldn't believe, like, it took my brain many seconds to compute what just happened. I was like, oh my God. And when I've reflected on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, he gave us more like commitment of money in that meeting than we had any operational year of the fellowship. So part of me years later, I was like, wow, we should have left earlier. But yeah, that was an incredible meeting. And I remember I covered my mouth because I was afraid of him to see how emotive I was. I was like, oh my God, maybe he's thinking I'm robbing the bank. Like, I don't know. I don't know how to even think about this. And then me and Michael left that meeting, and I remember we high-fived, and we both turned to each other, and I was like, we have to raise a venture fund now. Like, we actually have to we have to do this thing. And so that got us started. We raised the rest of our money, and we ended up raising a total of 20 million. We raised it all in 8 months with 30 investors. And looking back on it, I know how fast that is. But at the time, we had never worked with a venture fund. We had never raised money for something like this. So I just thought we were good at what we do. And then we had to raise our second fund, and it took 2 years and almost 90 investors to raise it. No. I was like, whoa. I was like, okay, this is like the more normal experience people talk about. And I think the difference was that with the first fund, people had to just make a guttural decision. There wasn't like spreadsheets we could send them of like, here's our performance and here's this and that. So it was kind of like, all right, do I trust these people? Do I like the mission? Like, you just have to go for it or not. Whereas with the second fund, we had a few years of data, but it was still super, super early in terms of what we were doing. And so people would get back to us a lot and be like, oh, well, you guys just look too early. And I'm like, of course we're too early. We're an angel pre-seed fund. Like, we're not going to actually show markups on our companies for many years. And yeah, it was much harder to raise that second fund.
Yeah, well, because these things take time, but I get it. It's really interesting to see,
because people had to think that they were making not only a guttural decision, but like a reasonably sound decision of like, okay, this makes sense now. And we just didn't have the numbers to prove what we're doing. And I can very happily say with our third fund, we had the numbers to prove like, hey, we appear to be pretty good at what we do. And our investor said, yes, you do. Take my money. And I was like, okay, great. So we raised our third fund in about a 4-month period. So that one came together much quicker.
Wow. And how many have you raised ever since?
So we've raised 3 main funds, and then we also raise these side vehicles called special purpose vehicles, where we'll have a company. Actually, really like a cool example of this is a company called Space Perspectives. One of the founders is just this incredible woman space geek, Jane. And actually, it'd be fun. It'd be really fun to have her on this. I think that'd be amazing.
We would love that.
Yeah, she's incredible, like aspirational. I interviewed her for something, and I was like getting chills. I was like, oh my God, like she was on the founding team of Biosphere 2. So she's like a very OG science nerd. So she's great. But we put together one of these special purpose vehicles where we say to our investors, hey, we like this company a lot. we've already put in what we can out of our main funds. And so we're raising extra money for them in a side vehicle. And we've done that for 14 of our companies. And then we'll raise a fourth main fund in about a year.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Okay, we're going to switch up to some of the student questions. And then
Sure.
All right, so this is a comment and a question. You are a real life superhero and a role model. Thank you. Have you had someone who inspired you to be on your STEM journey, and how did their encouragement help you become even more awesome?
Gosh, this is a great question. Well, first, thank you. There are definitely some influences, and one of them is not so much a STEM influence, but I read Maria Montessori early when I was starting my tutoring company, and she just had the deepest reverence for the human condition in children that I had ever read. It was very powerful and very visceral. And it kind of like infected me with this sense of like, yeah, like we can like really uphold greatness for young people, and I can be someone who is an advocate of that. So that was a big turning point. And then honestly, like working with the early Teal Fellows like Laura Deming and Eden Full, like watching what they were doing. And like, you know, Eden had this nonprofit called the Sun Saluter, where she was building something that would make a solar panel more efficient in like different villages. Because a lot of places will, you know, people like basically drop off solar panels and be like, here you go. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But if it's just lying stationary, you don't get as much efficiency off of it. Whereas if you could get it to move with the sun, you can get a lot more power off of it. And so Eden had this type of idea, and she was building it. And I learned so much, you know, kind of being like a sidekick on her journey there, where I remember we were in this one review meeting with her. And at the beginning of the meeting, she starts crying. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what is wrong? And, you know, we're asking like, Eden, what's wrong? And she says, well, I found a solution. I found a way to rotate the solar panel, but it's like really primitive. And like, I feel like it should be more like technologically savvy. And I was like, wait, what? I was like, and this is kind of before people were talking about like sustainability and technology. And so she was actually latching onto something that would become very important in the industry. But I don't, you know, I don't think she even knew it. In fact, she was feeling embarrassed. Like, oh, I don't have all these doodads in their and I remember asking her about how she made it work, and she used like buckets and water displacement and things like that to get the solar panel to move. I was like, Eden, this is great. I was like, you can go out there and do this, and you can be of service to people, and you can do it inexpensively with resources that people have. Like this to me sounds like the most brilliant way of doing this, instead of like dropping off something else somewhere and being like, hey, good luck using this. Like, see you later. And she ended up building up that nonprofit. And she has also become a startup founder. And so it's just really amazing to like watch that kind of journey. And she's someone who is such a go-getter. I remember in the early days of the Teal Fellowship, she was running her nonprofit. She was also a pre-Olympic rower. And I can't even remember, but there was a third thing that was big that she was doing. And I remember saying to her in a review, I was like, I don't know, Eden, I don't know if you could like do all of these big things at the same time. And she's like, I can. And I was like, okay, but it seems like I'm a one-trick pony. I like to focus on one thing at a time. So, you know, that was me projecting my own way of doing things onto her. And she just proved me wrong. She was like, yep, like did the nonprofit, did the pre-Olympic thing. And I wish I could remember what that third thing was, but she had a third thing that was also like a pretty giant commitment. And she just crushed all of it. So she really made me question what I thought was like possible for one human to do. So yeah, I love people like that.
Yeah, sounds like she's from the family of Elon Musk, like doing a million things at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, oh gosh, like she can do everything. Yeah.
Wow.
And she's a great human. She's a wonderful person. So I always love that combo of like, hey, this person is like completely outperforming, and they're like wonderful and kind and thoughtful and so on.
Very, very cool. Okay, next question from the students. What superpowers do you find you have that have pushed you to where you are today?
Superpowers. So I mentioned one earlier of like that working hard. I definitely have a can-do attitude. I tend to ask questions like, why not? Like, why not try to start a charter school? Why not try to start a venture fund? My superpower seems to be that like I'm not afraid of sort of like professional risk. And what I've noticed is that there's an edge that I really like of being both excited and nervous. And if both of those things are present, I find the outcomes tend to be like pretty good. If I'm just excited about something, it's like, oh, cool, that'll be fun. Like, and if I'm just nervous about it, that kind of feels like I'm just pushing myself to do something I don't want to do. But I've often found the excited, nervous line to be a really, really good one to follow. And it's funny because you would think that like, because I like to do sort of like risk taking in my career and I've moved across the country and I've done stuff like that, that I might be risky in other ways. And what's funny is like, I'm the biggest wuss ever when it comes to like what I would think of as physical risk. It's like, if I think I can hurt myself on something, I don't want to do it, which is kind of funny to me where in some ways, like I feel like, yeah, really bold and I'm going to do this and that. And both my parents ride motorcycles and I didn't even sit on a motorcycle until a couple of years ago. It's like, you couldn't even get me close to one. I just had not only zero interest, but like repulsion. I was like, there's just no way I'm doing this. And eventually I even rode on one once. It was only a few blocks, but I did it. I was like, I remember texting my parents. I was like, Mom and Dad, guess what I did? And I was like, wow, I guess I'm so predictable. My mom's like, you got on a motorcycle? I was like, I did. How'd you guess? So like, I was like, it took a very long time, but I finally did it. So yeah, that's, I think, one of the superpowers. And I'm trying to think if there's like another superpower. And this comes from teaching, I think, in part, but I think some of it is just one thing I've noticed over time is I'm really good at breaking things down for people so that they can do something like better or find the next step for something. And this started even as early as like when I was a section leader in music, like some of the other like music people I was with would like have trouble with something and I could just like break it down in a particular way, even if I didn't understand their instrument, which was really kind of fascinating. People would be like, wow, that really helped me. And I'm like, I don't know how I did that, but okay. And I feel like that same skill set is a similar one to one that I used as a tutor, as being a school principal, and also with 1517 working with our founders, where a lot of what we talk about is like, okay, cool, what's the next step on this? And how do we break it down into something like little and actionable, and doable?
That's a good point. Okay, so regarding 1517, for our super secret agents that are curious, like what is the age range that you're looking at for having them on board, and what is the process?
Sure. So there's a few things. So at 1517, we have a grant program where we will offer young people $1,000 to work on a project of their choosing. Generally, that is for high school students, college students, or people who are in that age range. And, they might be taking a gap year. They might be doing sort of self-study or something like that. Then with the investments we make, I think the youngest person that we've made an investment in has been 15. And we also have people who fit our non-degreed narrative who are in their 60s. So for us, it's really not about age. It's more about this narrative of people doing something outside of these like larger tract institutions like college and university. So yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, email is Danielle at 1517fun.com, and I'm always happy to talk to people. And actually, we just did something super fun. 2 weekends ago, we ran our first camp. We, for a long time, we wanted to do a summer camp for a long time, but like summer camp is kind of a logistical nightmare for all kinds of reasons. And so we just decided a few months ago, we were like, let's do a fall camp. Why not? Like, it's sort of that like, why not question that I mentioned earlier of like, sure, let's try it out. And we had 20 young people come from actually all over the world. We had a few people who came from the UK. We had some people who were local. And we made it free for the teens to attend. We didn't have the budget to be able to fly people in, but we said, hey, if you can fly here, like, you know, like you don't have to pay for camp. And it was great because we wanted to introduce our campers to our deep tech founders. So we did a field trip day on Friday where we took them around to a fusion company, a couple energy companies, some space companies, some robotics companies. It was really amazing. And part of the desire there is to show young people that you can get started on some of these really hard projects with a lot less than you think. It's like these were teams of sometimes like 3 or 4 people and not much else. And showing them like, hey, here's what this like little team is able to start, you know, getting started. And, you know, hopefully in 10 years, this team will be a big team and like, you know, be changing the way that we produce energy, for example. So we love doing stuff like that. So we also have events and community builders that we do. And those are just mostly like open to folks.
Very cool. Okay, Let's go back to when you were 11 years old for a sec. What did you learn that you have kept with you today?
Gosh, when I was 11, I think curiosity, actually. I think being curious and sort of like wondering about things. Like I think a quality that I have on our team is sort of like a playfulness or a mischievousness. And I think some of that also comes from curiosity and like this sort of question of like, yeah, why not have a camp? Like that kind of like, let's do it energy is something that I've retained a lot over time. And I hope I'm able to keep forever.
Very cool. Yeah, that's super important, I think, along the way. Because I think as kids, we're pretty curious usually, and we have a lot of questions and asking, and then somehow it stops. So I think it's important to keep that up. It's really, really important.
Well, and there's a friend who's also a mentor of mine who I remember when I was in my early 20s. This is when I met this person, and they were like an inventor and an investor, and like they'd done all these things. And they asked tons of questions. Like when we were in a group with other people, like this person would just like really drill down into like, hey, what did you mean by this? And what about that? And I remember asking about it at one point. And I said, wow, like you ask like lots of questions. And he's like, well, that's how I learned. He's like, you know, and I grew up in a culture where asking questions might somehow mean that you didn't know enough. Where it's like, oh, you're asking questions, it means you're dumb or something. And this guy really painted the opposite picture. And so for me, I remember it's like watching him gave me the permission of like, well, if this guy says the way to do life is by asking questions, I'm going to like push harder on that and like, you know, max out on doing that as much as possible. And it was another really pivotal moment of like, oh, like, I don't need to hide out and act like I know things I don't know. I could just learn about them instead.
That's a really, really good point. Okay, on that note, looking to the future is exciting. What do you imagine for Girls in STEM down the road, and how can we make sure that everyone gets a chance to be part of the STEM adventure?
Yeah, absolutely. I am like very, very excited for girls and young women in STEM. In fact, when we were putting out our camp, we had a light application on the camp just to learn more about people. And we had so many incredible young women apply. Part of me was like, we could make the whole camp women. We could just have young girls and women here, and that would be kind of amazing. We didn't do that for this camp, but it was so exciting and powerful, because when I was running the fellowship, the Teal Fellowship, it was like we had to go into like STEM, like, women in STEM communities to find women to apply and all this. And so I was kind of expecting a similar thing with our camp, to be like, okay, we're going to have to like go out there and really like find these young women. And they just like came full force at us, to the point where I was like, maybe we'll just make an all women's camp. That would be amazing. And like, we didn't go in that direction with it, but the fact that we could have is such a positive change. It was like, wow, this is amazing. And one thing I also noticed during this camp that I would want, young women to hear is when our group were, our teens were talking to the founders, man, the women were like right up front, like, I've got a question. I want to comment on this. I want to comment on that. And I was like, yeah, like, and we didn't need to do any priming around like, hey, make sure everyone asks questions or this or that, or, hey, we're going to call on people. Like, these women were bold and like, they just wanted to get the information. And I was so, like, the educator in me was so happy, because sometimes I'll be on even like a Zoom call with a classroom, and it's like, boys asking the questions, and and the teacher in me comes out, and I'm like, guess what? Next person asking a question, I'm just going to call on somebody, and I'm not afraid to do it. And, and then I'll get the women interacting more, but it's like, I have to kind of like make that happen. And so this was really inspiring to see that they were just like in charge. And so I would really I would really want to encourage, the young women listening here, to like, don't be afraid to like get out front on things. And what I'm seeing young women doing now, it's humbling, it's inspiring, and I'm like, get out of the way, boys. So like, it's coming.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's a really good point. Really, really good point. Okay, on that note, what advice would you give our aspiring secret agent trainees in the audience?
I would say start building and making. If there are things that you're interested in, find projects that you can do. Really, really start building as soon as you can, because I think there's a confidence that one gets making things that will transfer over to the rest of your learning. So yeah, start building.
Okay, awesome. I know you mentioned that your email is a good place to keep in touch with you, but how else can our special secret agent trainees follow your journey? Is it a website? Sure. Is it Instagram?
Yeah.
Or LinkedIn?
Yeah, we have 1517fund.com is the website. I'm on Twitter as D Strackman. We have a LinkedIn, but we don't really use it very much. And yeah, I'd really encourage people to reach out, because we have a community that we keep, but the only way that people get access to that is that we hear from them. So love to hear from people about what they're interested in and what they're up to, and then like bring them in a little closer.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Okay. So now we're going to do key takeaways in a minute, but first we're going to do the 60-second fun stuff. All right. Okay, cool. So what toys did you play with as a child?
What toys did I play with as a child? I was very into arts and crafts. Like, that was sort of my jam, like anything I could get messy with. And in fact, the more unstructured, the better. I still have these weird memories of my aunt. She always wanted to do these like very structured activities with us, and I hated it. I was like, oh, I just want to like get messy and experiment with things and do stuff in that realm. And I also remember liking to do like kitchen science and stuff like that growing up. That was always fun. I loved Legos. On the structured side, I loved building like the huge pirate ships and like the more intricate, the better. So I was kind of like varied across different areas, but yeah, things where I could be very active. That's what I liked best.
So much fun. Okay, yeah. What about favorite video game?
Oh my gosh, this is funny. Okay. So my favorite video game is F-Zero. It is a game from, I think, Super Nintendo. I started playing it, probably, I don't know, around 10 or 11. I think it's one of the best racing games out there.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
How about favorite superhero?
Favorite superhero? This is a tough one. Favorite superhero? I mean, Batman comes to mind. Like, I love sort of like the tech lair in the basement, and also like that they're, outside of like using one's sort of smarts, like there wasn't like a special sort of ability in that realm. It was more like, hey, like you've got to build stuff in the basement and do this. And I also liked the sort of like the doing right for citizens aspect. So some people are funny. They're like, oh, vigilantes, like, I don't know. And I'm like, no, vigilantes are awesome. So yeah, I would probably go with Batman.
Okay. Sci-fi. So Star Wars or Star Trek or both?
I'm kind of in the both camp. It's interesting. I watched just a few. I grew up with Star Trek Next Generation, and I watched some of the episodes just a couple of years ago to like kind of check it out again. And I was really impressed with like just like the ethics that they have in the show, actually. And so yeah, like I'm not like a super fan. My colleague Nick on our team, he's a Trekkie, like full on. He wore a Star Trek outfit to one of our meetings once. I was like, okay, this is a whole other level. But yeah, like more in the both camp, but probably a little more on the Star Trek side.
Okay, cool. Favorite animated series or show as a child?
Favorite animated show as a child? I think it was this old show called Animaniacs. It was really fun and kind of kooky. And yeah, just really enjoyed it.
Nice. Okay. And how about favorite show now, if you're watching anything?
I'm like not a big media consumer, but I loved Wednesday. I watched that end to end. I thought it was so good. I can't wait for another season. Yeah, really, really enjoyed it.
I need to watch that. That's on my list.
It's so great. So the characters are just wonderful.
Yeah, I love the Addams Family. So yeah, fun. Okay, let's do key takeaways and let us know if we missed anything, please. Help and support others to grow yourself. Be comfortable with leading and being with others. Find a mission to work for. Stay curious and explore new things. Highlight what you're passionate in and focus on them. Build on your interests. Take risks that benefit your journey. Be comfortable with asking questions. You have the power to push past your expectations. Start building and making.
Cool. I love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your super busy schedule, we know.
Thanks for having me.
With our secret agents today. Thank you for this great lesson. And I'm sure they will reach out. Bye for now.
Bye for now.